Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of our heart be acceptable to you, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen.
Amen.
Hear now this reading from the Gospel according to Mark. Then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He said all this quite openly. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." He called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? Those who are ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels." The word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God. Amen.
We have, I think, in this world a sort of an unspoken understanding that people get what they deserve. We cheer when a notorious criminal is brought to justice. It makes us feel that there is order to the circumstances of life. Order like do good, do bad, get bad. And we hold on to ideas like this even when life teaches us something completely different. If you've ever watched a child gleefully take her first steps, only to see her burst into tears a moment later when she has her first fall. If you've ever seen that, then you know that that goodness is no protection from pain. You know that bad things happen to good people. So if life teaches us this truth, then our faith confirms it. Jesus was as good as it gets, and still he suffered pain, all kinds of pain. Not only physical pain, but also spiritual pain and emotional pain. But by facing into it instead of running away from it, Jesus showed us a stunning new way to live. Not that many of us have dared to follow. In spite of everything he said and did, most of us still cling to our own version of the truth. And that is, if we are very, very, very good, then God won't let anything bad happen to us. We'll be protected. We'll be spared. Now, this is a shocking misinterpretation of the gospel, but it's also very human, just like Peter's response when Jesus broke the bad news to the disciples for the first time. He told them he was going to die. It was going to be awful, bloody, painful, humiliating. And he didn't want them to be fooled. He wanted them to understand that when the time came, they were not to believe that Jesus' death was some horrible mistake, something that should have been avoided. They were to believe that somehow God was in it, working to turn his pain and suffering into a body that would last forever. That's what he wanted them to know. But Peter only heard the first part, that part about suffering and death, before he exploded at Jesus. As Matthew puts it, "God forbid it, Lord. This must never happen to you." There's no way for us to know what was going on inside Peter's head. Now, plenty of people say that he was putting his own agenda ahead of God's, and that he should never have used God's name to challenge God's will. It's pretty complicated. I think the truth is actually much simpler than that. I think he just loved Jesus and didn't want him to die. I also think that death was probably the worst fear that Peter had, and that Jesus' reference to his own death cranked up Peter's fear so high that he couldn't stand it. God forbid it, Lord. This must never happen to you. Why? Because if it can happen to you, Lord, it can happen to me. It can happen to anyone. And no one is safe. If Jesus was vulnerable, then so was everyone else. That is why I think Peter was protesting so strongly. But Jesus' response to him was just as strong. Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things. It's the harshest rebuke that Jesus gives anyone in all the Gospels. But the use of his word Satan is a clue to how tempted he really was by what Peter said to him. Peter's suggestion that he should be spared must have really resonated with him. And he would pray for that very thing before he died. My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. The thing is, God had given Jesus a vision of his death that was not all dark. There was purpose in it. The ultimate good would come because of it. There was clearly something that lay beyond it. And Jesus knew that his job was to walk toward it instead of running away. And that's a vision that he tried to share with his disciples. And he dared them to follow. Now, the Jews were an oppressed people, and for many in Jesus' day, there was little freedom or meaning to be found in life. But if they were not afraid to lose their lives, Jesus told them, they might be surprised to find them. The image that he used was a cross, which had no religious significance at the time, because Jesus hadn't been crucified on one yet. A cross was simply a method of execution, the one preferred by the Roman government. It struck fear into people's hearts in the same way like a picture of an electric chair or the chamber where they give someone lethal injection would cause us to be afraid. There were days when the road to Jerusalem was lined with crosses, each of them bearing the dead or dying body of someone whose public execution was meant to scare everyone who saw it. Crucifixion was not only a very effective means of punishment, it was also a very effective form of intimidation. It reinforced the idea that death was the most awful thing in the world, and that people with any sense should do everything within their power to avoid it. But by telling his disciples to pick up their crosses, Jesus defied that idea. He suggested that there were things in this world worse than death, like living in fear. Living in fear is near the top of the list. If they were going to let fear run their lives, then fear would become their God. The only standard for their behavior would become how much something scared them or not. If it didn't scare them, they would do it. If it did scare them, they would avoid it. And then when their anxious days finally came to an end, you can't avoid death forever. When their anxious days finally came to an end, they would discover that they had never really lived life at all. But see, that was not the only choice they had. Instead of surrendering themselves to fear, they could instead surrender themselves to God. They could deny the panic-stricken voice inside of them saying, "Play it safe." And they could listen to that other voice instead, the one that says, "Wake up, follow me, do not fear." Now that voice has never promised safety. but it has always promised life. It's never offered freedom from pain. It's only ever offered freedom from fear. Now, I do not believe that we all have to go and get ourselves killed to be true followers of Jesus. Some people have done that. But God seems to allow the rest of us a much broader understanding of the cross than that. In our reading this morning, Jesus tells his followers to take up their crosses, which is not a death wish as much as it's an invitation into a way of life. And he doesn't tell them to go find their crosses, because he's pretty sure that they know exactly where their crosses are. I think each and every one of us know exactly where our true crosses are. He just encourages them to go ahead and pick those wretched things up. To stop covering them up and pretending they're not there and then accidentally tripping over them. He urges them to squat down and get a hold of those things and pick them up so that they can find out for themselves that there's more to life than being afraid of death. 2,000 years later, our crosses don't have much to do with standing up to the Roman government. But fear is timeless, and my guess is that each of us has something that we're afraid of. Maybe it's fear of admitting an addiction that's eating away at your life. Or maybe it's the fear of tackling a memory that still feels like a sucker punch every time it comes into your brain. Maybe it's the fear of standing up for something you believe in. Maybe it's the fear of being honest about who you are to people who are going to judge you for it. Maybe it's a fear that you have an illness that no medicine can cure, or your child does, or your friend does. Whatever it is that scares you to death so that you start offering to do anything if it will just go away, that's your cross. Now, if you leave it there, it will kill you. If you turn away from it with the excuse that this never should have happened to you, God forbid it, Lord, then you deny God the chance to show you the greatest mystery of all. That right there, right in the dark fist of your worst fear, is the door to abundant life. Stop running from your cross, Jesus says. Reach down and pick it up. It's not nearly as scary once you get your hands on it. And here's the thing, friends. No one is asking you to handle that cross all by yourself. There's somebody that's going to be there to help you with that cross. All that you have to do is believe in God more than you believe in fear. And then pick it up and follow me, and I will show you the way that leads to life. In the name of the Father, and the Son,